Hi, welcome. On this video, I'm going to be talking about learning theory and um, discussing why it is that when certain ideas don't meet expectations, or more specifically, why learning doesn't always line up properly, it's because of the fact that dogs are social, relational beings, and their decision-making process is influenced at that level through the connection they share with us, through nature, and through the pack relationship. Now here on this diagram, um, I'm providing this as a visual to help people understand how this all connects. This all comes together. All the cogs on the wheel move together, and the problem is when one of the wheels is turning, such as in this case with this ideology about learning theory, and the other wheel isn't turning with the owner changing, because again, what I show is that the owner is the key. They're the main ingredient to change. Change happens in and through them. So again, it's about changing, bringing people into the right relationship through leadership, and then get into the specifics of change itself with the hands-on method through the relational scripting process. So, but here I'm going to talk a little bit about learning theory and about packaging. Why it is that I show very clearly that training is a intervention, and that when you're approaching the dog and human relationship with the goal of modifying behavior, you have to keep that in mind within the framework of how behavior comes together. What does behavior really represent? Okay, and what it represents is a pushing beyond the boundary lines of the follower script, which impacts the dog's decision-making process. So, but here within the framework of learning theory, what you need to look at are, as you're doing the scripting, many trainers use learning, and the typical thing they use within the scripting process to influence a dog's state of mind and create the physical picture of change are treats and creating that association through clickers and through the person themselves. And so, but here what you have to look at is you have to go a little deeper. This is, this whole scripting, the ability to be able to break this down comes from connecting all the relational dots properly. I've worked off this model for many, many years. It's very consistent. There is a script that you can follow, and when you follow the scripting, you'll see that, because again, over 50% of the people I help continue to come from these systems of training which promote learning this way, which they promote it outside the boundary lines of the person coming in the right relationship through leadership. So that's where the problem exists, because the reason people are struggling to overcome behavior issues in the first place is that they're failing to fulfill the leadership role of the dog at the social relational level. So therefore, behavior issues are a spillover effect. Now here, just like, again, when people want context or an example to follow, all you need to do is look at, start to look at when the actions don't line up with what the person says. Even in the human world, you can see that similar type of thing that can happen even with people who are very selfish and self-serving, and they basically are going through a certain the motion, so to speak, but they lack any real connection, or they don't really care about people. It's very similar that way in terms of why learning doesn't line up, why this stuff can break down, how it is that dogs can go through the motions and again paint the picture of change when change isn't really happening. And this is where you have to apply it. When you see dogs, the script taking place where it looks like change, you have to be able to put it to the test. You have to qualify it and apply it to the dog's decision-making process. And the big question that it comes down to the standard of asking is unwanted behavior diminishing, yes or no? And that's the main question really to ask. That is the real standard, not whether or not you have the picture of change, which has really become problematic. It's become, really that standard is really become very popular for people, because what's happening is learning is being promoted that way. It's not being put to the test, and until people leave the environment, the controlled environment, where of course the picture will be painted up that way, and they hit the real world and then only discover that unwanted behavior isn't really going away and meaningful influence hasn't taken hold. So again, what you have to look at is the influence type, the type of influence that's happening between dogs and owners. That's very important. And this is where you get into the commands, the strength of the spoken word, whether or not that actually has meaningful influence behind it or not, is whether or not these wheels are turning properly, and so the script is actually, the picture of change is actually, you can actually rely on, you can stand on it, say, okay, well, the picture is actually what it is, because everything works together, everything will line up properly. And so that's what happens is, and I say about response being disconnected, the assumptions often made by many who promote learning this way is that, response or the scripting as it comes together, the dog does the come down, stay, and the typical, obedient script is that's representative of change moving forward. And again, oftentimes that simply is not true. I mean, it does not always represent a like-minded state with the dog at all, because there's an issue of devaluation here. Okay, dogs are relational beings, so just like people will objectify, dogs will devalue the people, and they see them more as property. This is where you get that very possessive connection happening between dogs and owners. And the problem is when people invest their emotions into the relationship, they sometimes have a real problem with defining that or getting clarity, because their emotions are involved. And so that's why, again, I show training is an intervention. You need a professional to come on the scene, so to speak, and help people reconcile their emotions. So basically it's a matter of bringing people in the right relationship. And really what happens is the bond becomes stronger when you start to change how you think. Sometimes the fear is that perhaps you're going to break the spirit or drive of the dog, or you're going to lose somehow. And I understand that, but the problem is it's about coming in the right relationship so that you can take the stress off the dog. The dogs who are holding this role, it can really cause a lot of issues, and truly they're not happy, and the owner isn't going to be happy as well. But again, it's one of these things with really understanding that it's not about being mean to the dog, it's about right relationship. It's just like parenting, basically. So here you get into this thing about response being disconnected. It's the ability to being able to look at the motives that underpin response, and that only comes through looking at this through the relational lens. You have to be able to connect everything this way. So even certain concepts such as counter conditioning can be a problem, because again, you look at how these wheels turn, and you'll see if the owner isn't changing, then what can happen is the dog will think about a certain situation or a person differently, but it's a issue of devaluation again. The dog may accept certain situations, but the devaluation issues happening. So the mind will appear to settle and again give you the same picture of change, but you're not really fixing the problem. The relationship is still in a misalignment, and that will come out. You'll always see the behavioral clues, and it's important to understand that there always will be clues ultimately that the relationship hasn't really changed at all. You're just getting a certain picture of things, but you're still having the same problem. So, but here to go a little further into this, you talk about the roadmap. Why the roadmap, the mainstream roadmap that many trainers, even balanced trainers to some degree, will follow, is using quadrants, working off the learning-based map, and then choosing, which quadrants, you're looking at negative and positive. But the problem is, again, it's how this roadmap can really affect things if you're starting out right out of the starting gate, working off this roadmap to any sort of degree. Because the problem with this roadmap, the way that it works, is that oftentimes it's a packaging problem. People who are needing help They need training to be at a intervention level in order to get the script changed out at such a level that it's going to be meaningful enough for their dog and for their situation. The problem is if you're using certain concepts even at a certain level, the trainer themselves may get away with that because they're standing on the right side of nature. They're thinking very assertively. They're in a really high level of leadership. And so these concepts won't necessarily impact their ability to role change a dog. However, it will impact those who are coming to them for help because they're not thinking the same way. So this is where you really have to go down a little deeper here to understand that it's really necessary to approach training this way if you want to help more people. And there's a way to go about it. It's not, although it can be very challenging to get people thinking, but it's just like parenting. It's just a matter of explaining things properly, getting people to see the big picture, and getting people to understand that you're not you're not being mean to the dog. It's all about understanding how to create this level of change. But it's important to get people where they need to be because again, in certain situations, you need every little bit of relational momentum that you can get. So anyway, this is again just a little brief overview of learning theory, give you an idea of why it will break down for some and not others. But again, the problem with a lot of trainers who have trouble understanding it and figure out when role change is happening or it's not happening, because again the picture will be very, very similar. A lot of times it's very difficult in certain environments to figure out, based just at the physical response level, what actually represents meaningful change and what is still the issue of devaluation is still in the equation at some level, is the ability to understand how all these wheels turn, how this all connects, and being able to put it to the test under reasonable influence, being able to test it to see exactly if, in fact, meaningful influence has taken hold. It's the ability to look at the relationship in this way. It's almost like getting a three-dimensional view. And then you could be able to re-script it properly for what's needed. So anyway, if you're interested in finding out more about this system, you can visit my website, k9pack.com. Also have guides that are available. Beyond the Leash, it's my foundational method guide. And Mind and Body Kinetics. It goes into more detail as to how this all works, and you get into the issue of what creates meaningful change, why this model takes the path it does, and why I define training as an intervention. So anyway, thanks very much for watching. I hope you have a great day.